You wish to test me? Good. I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Hey Guys podcast. This week we look back at one of the most 80s movies of the 80s, and arguably the last true 80s movie of the 80s. 1988's Rambo III, the most expensive movie of all time when released, represents everything we associate with the decade, taking the muscle-bound action movie to its evolutionary conclusion before the industry left such sweaty frivolities behind and looked towards a leaner brand of action hero. So, Rob, you said that you'd never seen this movie before when we spoke last week. Was that true, or had you just conflated its existence with any one of the many parodies that appeared in its wake?
So, as soon as this film started and our hero walks into a fighting ring and then Troutman comes in to watch him, I thought, I have seen this fucking film. But then after Troutman didn't eat a pig snout sandwich, I realised, no, I've seen Hot Shots Part 2.
It's unbelievable though, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
is that the only case where the parody has one of the original stars in it? And like, you occasionally get like cameos perhaps, but the fact that Richard Crenna actually stars as fundamental, I think he has a different name, but fundamentally the exact same character in Hot Shots Part 2.
Part 2, yeah. It's he plays somebody else, but it is Troutman. But it's insane. So no, I have never seen this film before.
But you've kind of seen this film before. It's one of those.
I've kind of seen this film. I mean, not just in like Hot Shots. You've seen this film in many things. Because, I mean, this may be a lesser Red Scorpion as well.
Oh, dear. No, come on.
But, I mean, you've seen this film. If you've seen Red Scorpion, it's pretty much the same kind of premise as well. So,
that's my argument with this film, in so much that in many respects, this really is, as I said, the last hurrah for 80s action movies. Because after this, you get we've mentioned on previous podcasts that the 80s, as we think of it, as a pop culture kind of thing almost, it didn't start in 1980 and end in 1990. Most decades don't work like that, and the 1980s certainly didn't. In terms of the movies, it very much kind of started as we know the 80s, and I would argue in 1984. There's a bit of crossover into 1983, but really it starts in 1984, and in many ways it starts with stuff like Rambo, Rocky IV, and Rambo, it's not called Rambo, First Blood Part 2.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like Rambo bookends what we think of as being the 80s in cinema. And this is really that last film. It's going for it. It's a massive vanity project, which you get from that opening sequence, I love. I love that opening when you get like the music cue and he's putting on the headband and the music just kicks in and he turns around and looks at the camera. I'm like, fuck me, this film's dope as shit. It's stupid as all hell, but
I like everything you've just said, except for the fact I am calling bullshit on you calling this the last true 80s action film when Die Hard wasn't released until February 89.
Was it 89 Die Hard? Jeez, I had it in my head that it was 88.
So I am calling absolute bullshit.
No, I know what you mean. But surely, with Die Hard, that is the start of the move towards a more traditionally 90s.
That is it, yeah. So
we think of it as being an 80s movie, and
it's still an 80s action film, but
it is.
Die Hard starts you off on a different type of action. We've said this before.
Die
Hard starts you off on you don't have to be a muscle-bound dude. You don't have to be. I don't know. I mean, you said it last week. I joked all the time. I always joke about Rambo 4 that Rambo kills Burma. It turns out he started off by killing Russia first because...
He kills quite a few, yeah. The numbers in this are pretty impressive.
I mean, I will obviously say as well, you are absolutely flat out wrong if you say this is better than First Blood Part 2. But
I think it is. And I will get to that. I don't think... I'm not going to criticize you for saying First Blood Part 2 is a better movie. I appreciate a lot of people prefer it. I have a very specific... And part of it, I'm not going to lie, is nostalgia. This was the movie I grew up watching the most when I was younger. And I had my doubts when I was rewatching it, because I remember you mentioned it last week, that you preferred Part 2. And I say, I think Rambo 3 is better. And for a while watching this, I had a bit of a wobble until he got on that horse and they started playing with goats. And I will go through the list in a moment as to what happens after that sequence. But from then on, it is one of the most non-stop movies I've ever seen.
I wrote that down. It's pretty much balls to the wall.
It takes a while actually to get going, but once it starts moving, it just doesn't stop.
And I do understand that, and I do like it. I honestly thought I was going to walk away from this film not liking it, It is definitely the third in the three for me. I'd put it 2, 1, 3. But like that always seems to happen with.
So where would you put 4 then?
Well, 4 because I would no of these
Rambo
3. Rankings, I wouldn't of the original 3. I'm not counting the other 2.
No, if we're going to count all 5, because I have a very I think.
Oh, 5's number 1. 5's top.
What's that?
5 is top.
The best one.
Yeah.
You are. Yeah. I know you're lying. Yeah, I know. You kept a straight face there for a second. You did pretty well. So, right, if we accept that, and you might disagree actually, but I think the common wisdom acknowledgement is that First Blood is the best movie, and I think that's objectively the correct answer. You might prefer number 2, but I think First Blood is just a much better movie than any other Rambo film. I would actually then have Rambo 2008 Rambo or Rambo 4 as the second best. I think that's aged wonderfully. And I think, again, despite it gets lost amidst the violence, but you really get back to who Rambo is in that movie. And it's one of the differences between the kill count in this film is really high, but it doesn't feel that high because the kills aren't particularly egregious.
No, I read that as well, right? I read the kill count was high, okay? Mm-hmm. And when I read that while I was watching the film, I was like, where? And then
I know.
At the end of the film, you go, there it is. Okay. But for me, I would put it 2, 1, 4, 3, and 5. That's where I would put it.
So I would have 1, 4. See, 3 and 2, I think, I understand what you mean. I think I prefer 3 to 2. And my big issue and the reason for that, and then a long, long way until 5. 5 is a horrible film. About that. But the reason I prefer this is because I know where I stand with this film. My issue with number 2 is that it's got 1 foot on either side of the fence. It's like it's trying to still do that kind of earnestness and, trying to add a kind of sense of, I don't want to say political intrigue, that's the wrong term, but, trying to kind of have at least an attachment to what the first movie was about and obviously what the book was about, but then still have him just mowing back down Vietnamese and, with the grenade launcher and all that jazz and his top off. And I really hate the soft focus moments in that film. And I don't mean soft focus in terms of narrative. I mean, literally, the camera uses a really soft focus for the love sequences.
They just put a jar of Vaseline on the lens.
Oh, it's fucking horrible, and it makes my toes curl. Whereas with number 3, it's dumb as a bag of hammers, and it embraces that. I don't like where it goes in the third act when they try and turn Rambo into more of a kind of 80s... it's like he's spitting out one-liners when he suddenly shows up with Trapman at the end, and it's so awkward. I hate it.
It's mad as well, because he's only going into Afghanistan to save his friend. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of it, he does the whole white savior trope, where all of a sudden the only person who could save the Afghans from
the Russians is the white guy, which is whatever. That's an 80s. That is an 80s trope. But
I watched this film, right, and a big question came to me: where the fuck did he pull that bow and arrow from? Which orifice did that come from?
I don't know. I got that down as one of my notes. I was like, wait a minute, where the hell did that go? I mean, don't be wrong. I'm really glad it showed up because, the 2 iconic weapons, Rambo's got 2 of the most iconic weapons in movies.
The knife and the bow and arrow.
The knife, I think the knife might be even bigger in this
film. And that is not a knife. That is a fucking sword.
It reminds me of what was Cobra, the knife that the bad guy used in Cobra, where it was so ridiculously huge. And obviously, he's always had that huge knife, but it looked even bigger in this film. But the bow and arrow, obviously, he uses it to a greater extent in First Blood Part 2. But it's still iconic, and it still looks great in this. But all I could think was, which pocket did he fucking take that from?
Friend of the show, Dave. I told him we were watching this, and then Dave said, he's not a fan of Rambo Part 3. And he said, especially when he kills a helicopter with an explosive arrow. Yeah. Now, we're getting through this film and no explosive arrow, but I can't even... When the guy turned around and said, do you want to see your weapons? And it was just a bunch of C4 and stuff.
Yeah.
And there was no bow and arrow. So I thought, maybe he's confused this with Part 2.
Part 2,
It isn't a bow and arrow. And then all of a sudden he gets up the helicopter. There's a helicopter coming for him, but it's enough time to kit it out. He is literally building.
He has a full-on kit-up scene where he's making it in, on the spot.
And he's carrying and all of a sudden he kills the helicopter with a bow and arrow. And I just thought, I had to rewind it and thought, wait, was it in that black little shoulder strap thing he grabbed from the helicopter? But if it was, he never had that before.
Yeah,
it really confused the fuck out of me. Obviously I understand cutscenes and all this shit, but I know with this type of film, and like you shouldn't really be thinking, come on, dude, this guy rescued Afghanistan from Russia. You shouldn't really be thinking too much about the bow and arrow. But I can't shake the bow and arrow.
Yeah. No, it's a strange one, but I was glad that he at least got to blow up like one of the helicopters, and that's where I mentioned at the top that this was at the time the most expensive movie ever made, and for the longest time you're like, where's all the money gone into? And you're like, well, those helicopters didn't come cheap, and it, like you said, so much of the kill count comes in that the final act, and so much of the budget was clearly blown down because a lot of it's filmed out in the desert on location, admittedly, which I appreciate actually doesn't come cheap, but all of a sudden the Russian army does show up, and you have that silly moment then because the film is ridiculous throughout, but you do have moments of Rambo being what I think of as being quintessentially Rambo. And I think the biggest issue with this film is that it overcompensates for Commando. So obviously this is at the peak of the whole Schwarzenegger versus Arnie thing, and Commando's come out, and I think he's seen that and go, oh, we've got to go further down that route. I've got to be a one-man killing machine. And that's not what really he's about. He's not about standing there and mowing down guys. What he's actually closer to is like Metal Gear Solid Snake. He's about, like, right from the first film, about just being better at dealing with the battlefield and those around him. He doesn't just stand there and just mow people down. He hides in trees, he makes traps, and he kills people. He's more like a panther than like a bear or something like that. And there are moments in this when he goes back to that, but they're undone almost immediately. Like, the infiltration at the Russian camp is really cool. And then the kid shows up, the alarm goes off, and he turns into Rambo as we think of him, like 80s Rambo, where he's mowing everyone down. But then they have like the cool sequence in the cave, which I actually think might be the best sequence in the film. And everyone remembers him fighting the giant Russian just after, but I think it's in the cave when he's killing all the Russians.
Yeah, when he hangs that giant Russian dude, though,
that is cool. That is cool.
Do you know what you said, though? Like everything, aside from the giant Russian dude, right? You said that quintessential Rambo was him taking people out.
Yeah.
Apparently, only if they're under 6 foot. There was meant to be something in, because the original director was Russell McKay, and then he left. And I can't remember the name of the director that they brought in off the top of my head.
For this film, Peter McDonald.
Yeah, Pete McDonald. So they brought him in, and Pete McDonald remembers. So they were saying, like, the reason why Russell McKay left, Sly wasn't happy with the fact he was getting these people that don't look like Russians, or that he was getting male models to be. Yeah, and then Peter McKay turns around and said, no. What happened was he's picking all these people out, saying they're not right because they're all over 5'10". So, they're all taller than Sly. So Sly's like, I'm not having this shit.
Well, it's one of the weirdest things beyond the whole where did he get that bow and arrow from? For me, was when I look back at this film, like, they obviously paint him, and I mentioned the fact that it's a bit of a vanity project, and you think about that classic Rambo 3 poster, which is one of my favorite posters of the 80s, where he is literally painted as this giant on screen. And I was always like, oh, well, that's where they got, what I always thought of as being the ultimate big bad guy. So, you think of, what was it recently? The Dial of Destiny had like a big bad guy. It's still a trope to this day where it's like you don't have to say anything. You just have to be massive. But I always sort of, the actor's name is Randy Rani, I think his name is, who played Kurov in this film. Doesn't say shit. He's the guy who like hangs up Colonel Troutman. Just rather than putting it on like a peg, he's the one who holds him up the entire time. And he's the one he blows up. And I always remember, obviously, they have that fight out in the desert after he comes out of the hole. And in my memory, this guy, Kurov, was like the biggest guy in the world. And then I rewatched it. I'm like, he's a bear of a guy. But he looks about like 5'7".
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
In my memory, that dude was like 6'8". I was like, but he's standing. He looks short next to Stallone.
He's wide as fuck, but he's not as tall as Stallone. And that was the thing. Like, Stallone wasn't having any of it, apparently. He was just like, no.
Unbelievable. But I just thought it was so interesting that, like I said, if you'd asked me for this film, he was the quintessential big bad. The guy who doesn't say anything, but he's just huge, and you're going to have a fight with him later. And I was like watching the film, I was like, this motherfucker's like 5'6". I'm probably, I keep making it shorter. It's being ridiculous, but yeah.
It's like how I convolute your height whenever.
By the end of the podcast, I'm like 7'6" or whatever the fuck it is.
Was there ever an explanation in any of these Rambo films that he could fly a helicopter?
Well, I totally accept that he can, because he was in the army for years, obviously, and the whole idea.
Yeah, but
was
it's
that
like a tunnel rat kind of guy. He was the guy you send behind enemy lines. He's not the guy you send over the helicopter on his own.
He mentions in the first one when he has that, again, just how disparate the films became after the first one. Like the second one is the second film is much closer to this one than it is to the first. They took a really big step away from the first one almost immediately. But when he has that really emotional breakdown at the end of First Blood, and he's talking about how when he was out, with the army, and he was like driving multi-million-pound vehicles, like he was the ultimate soldier. I think the idea was that he could do everything. Although in this film, he's like, "Do you think you can fly that thing?" And he's like, I guess we'll find out. That's not verbatim.
All right, so they put in a throwaway line, and you're happy with it. Okay, I get it. Let's move on.
We should talk. Sorry, Karen.
So you had First Blood, Blood Part 2, and then Rambo 3,
and then Rambo, and then Rambo Last Blood. It's the craziest naming this side of Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
And I think it's even weirder because they went back and changed it. So it was First Blood, then it was First Blood Part 2. Then they changed First Blood Part 2 to Rambo First Blood Part 2. Then it was Rambo 3. Then it was just Rambo, unless you're in a different country where it might be Rambo 4. And then it was Rambo Last Blood. They are bananas. Absolutely bananas. And as I said, like tonally, again, kind of like Fast and Furious, all over the map. All over the map. It's just a shame that this one peaked with the first one, I would say, at least, anyway. But you mentioned there helicopters, and I had to bring that up. I would arguably give the helicopter in this film, that's what's the name of the god? The
name of the god?
No, the Colonel. Is it Colonel Zeissens?
Oh, no, the bad guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Played by Mark de Jong. None of the guys playing Russians in this are Russians, by the way, in case it's not abundantly clear. But they had obviously spent a lot of money on that helicopter. And my God, I would argue that it should have second billing behind Stallone. I think it should be Stallone and then that helicopter, because they just keep going back to the well over and over and over again. It's almost like they know the Colonel isn't a physical threat, but he is if we keep putting him in this fucking awesome helicopter and have him just mow down Afghans.
I love how you said that, right? Because I wrote as well, an object should have second billing past after Rambo. It wasn't a helicopter.
What was it?
His hair.
Oh, his hair is absolutely magnificent.
His hair needs like top billing. That fucking coif that he's got on top of his head is doing its own acting.
It really is. And it's one of the few things, other than maybe the opening sequence where you get a few hints of it, but especially if you're watching this on Blu-ray or if you're watching this in HD, the cut to HD is really impressive, the transition. Like, this film looks great. Whatever you might think of the movie, as dumb as it might be, it's a really good looking movie. And it's dumb
as a box of hammers.
Of course it is, yeah. But the film looks fantastic, and it's shot well. But the one thing that ages it is that goddamn Barnett. You just can't help it. And it actually gets more magnificent. If you notice, in that last sequence when he and Troutman drive off, they all try and convince him to stay in Afghanistan. And I think in the original script, he was due to stay in
he was going to stay in there because this is where he felt accepted.
Yeah. But he obviously goes off with Troutman. His hair is even more magnificent in that sequence. It's somehow longer and fuller and more, I don't know, man.
Because I think they brought him back to refilm a scene. Staying on the hair side of it, I also wrote something else down. Did Red ever have hair? This is 1988, right?
No. He's looked the same forever as well.
Yeah. I mean, even when he was Clarence
Boddicker. He's one of those guys. Yeah, but he always looked 70 years old because of his hair.
Yeah. Like, he's never had hair. Even as Clarence Boddicker, he had whatever hair he had left cut really short. So it just looks...
it's basically that haircut, though.
But Jesus Christ, whatever haircut he's got in this film is insane. And who wears a white suit? Who wears a white suit to Thailand? Or Bangkok.
Yeah, and it's a weird sequence there when he comes back to tell him about Troutman, because they kind of almost play it off like he's saying, "Oh, I just came back here to tell you that Troutman's been captured," like as a courtesy.
Yeah.
So, no, you're obviously going back to tell him, so he'll offer to go in behind enemy lines. And when Rambo does, he acts all like, "Oh, you? Really? You?" It's like, of course, you're not coming back all the way to Thailand in person just to tell Rambo, "Oh, sorry, mate." Because he clearly doesn't like him based on their first meeting. He's not going to go all that way to say, "Oh, just a courtesy, I thought I should tell you that Troutman was captured." Of course he's trying to convince him.
He was doing...
Like, "You really? I mean, he played him for a fool.
He was doing a good reverse psychology job, to be fair.
And he absolutely nailed him. But I tell you what, like, all through this film, Stallone looks amazing. He looks fantastic. And, you know, again, I mentioned about this being a bit of a vanity project. He's always glistening. He's in unbelievable shape. He's somehow pulling off that ridiculous haircut. But even when he's dressed in civilian clothes for 1988, somehow he still looks cool. Like when
but he's not really in civilian clothes, is he? He's in like some sort of monk's garb. Kind of.
But he's wearing jeans. Like, they're slightly boot cut, but he's like pulling off, and even like the kind of military gear he looks, it doesn't look 80s. He's got this like totally dope watch as well. I don't know, man. Stallone just looks fantastic, and that is again one of those. It's a shame that they went the Commando route again, because as I said, I think he's at his best when he is showing emotion. He's not just mowing people down, and so much of Stallone's acting is behind his eyes.
Yeah,
and just like you know, you can really feel that he's like. He can turn in a moment's notice, but he doesn't want to necessarily be doing this. And again, that big difference. But as much as I love Schwarzenegger, Stallone's a much better actor, and he deserves to have more to work with.
That's apples and oranges.
Like, well, it's not though, is it? Because
Schwarzenegger, Stallone's a better actor. You lead both of these guys on in the 80s, and you go right. Show your pecs a little bit, right? Show the gun show, and just muddle your way through your fucking lines, and we'll get a decent film out of you.
That's the point. That makes sense for Schwarzenegger. Like, if I think of like the two best movies that Stallone has arguably done, you say First Blood, and I would say Rambo, the first movie. And don't get me wrong, I love First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 4. They're fun and ridiculous. But his best two movies are Rambo and First Blood. And in both of those films, he has a lot to work with.
You're not counting any of the Rockies.
Oh, sorry, did I say Rambo? Sorry, I meant Rocky. Sorry, I do apologize. I meant Rocky 1 and Rambo First Blood.
Okay.
And in both of those, on an emotional level, he has a lot to work with. And he does a lot with what he's given. He's a genuinely good actor. And it's almost a shame. And you can see in some of the interviews that he subsequently gave that he's like, well, I'm kind of stuck in this world now because that's what the audiences expect from me. But give him the right material. I mean, Jesus Christ, he was up for an Oscar for Creed not too long ago. And I actually think he should have won that.
He's not a bad actor. It just like the roles that they did when they put it, like in the 80s, like the Rambo stuff and short, like this is not a good film. It's not like overall it's not really a good film. It's interesting to watch. It may be fun in parts, but it is fucking stupid.
It's stupid.
It's an absolutely stupid film. But
if we're going to compare this, the obvious comparison is Commando, for instance. Commando is more fun than this, for sure.
Well, to be fair, I would probably compare it more with Red Scorpion.
Well, yeah, but this is so much better than Red Scorpion. I don't think they're in the same category in terms of quality.
It's the same fucking premise.
Yeah, but it's so poorly made just because it's the same premise. They don't belong in the same.
Do you remember Red Scorpion, or are you just slagging it off?
No, I remember Red Scorpion. It's a terrible movie. It's a terrible movie. Commando is fun, but if you go back and watch it, and we did it for the podcast, one of the things we noticed, there are many aspects of it. It's not a brilliantly made movie, but it's fun. It almost kind of succeeds despite itself. Whereas this isn't as fun, but what it is a really well-made movie, which is almost a miracle, because you mentioned earlier the fact that, you've got this director, Russell Mulcahy.
He was, what's it called?
He's the director of Highlander. Yeah. And so, he falls out with Stallone for whatever the reason, giant Russian models. And they bring in Peter McDonald. Admittedly, Peter McDonald is like a prolific second unit director. He'd worked on Guardians of the Galaxy, the Harry Potter films, Empire Strikes Back. I know that would upset you, but also Rogue One, which you like. But, he's got an extensive collection of second unit work. But to be brought into the hot seat on 2 weeks' notice to not only be directing Rambo 3, this was the most expensive movie of all time. Your first movie you ever direct is the most expensive movie of all time.
Dude, hang on. No. You're giving him too much credit. He was brought in as a mouthpiece just to do what Stallone wanted. There's no way in hell, right? Stallone brought this dude in who's a second unit director and said, right, you take charge and I'll follow your lead. No.
Oh no! Of course, Stallone had a huge amount. Like he ghost directed this.
Yeah.
Like he's still the director. Like it's still a big deal to be brought up to
Oh no, I get. Yeah, I get that. This was his first one as well, wasn't
but
it?
the point is, yeah, the fact that, like I said, it's his first movie. The only thing I could think of in terms of comparison, we did it a few weeks ago, was Simon West and Con Air. And I know that wasn't the most expensive film of all time, but for that to be his first movie and to have that many stars, and it's similar with this, and similar to Con Air, it's got that slightly unfussy but stylish look to it. Like, I don't think, anyone's watching Rambo 3 and going, oh my God, that's Peter McDonald behind the camera for sure. It doesn't have any of those kind of visual signifiers.
No, because it was all established, mind, before he came on board. You got to remember that.
Of course. The work.
It's already had 2 weeks of filming. It's already, like, everything about this film has been established, and they just brought this guy into the seat. So
yeah, but you still, like, so much of that visual language that a film dictates, it comes from its director. And I just think it's, like, fundamentally, and maybe that's why it's kind of nondescript in some respects, but it's just really well made. And you see it from that opening sequence when he's fighting the dude with the sticks. Again, a ludicrous way to start the film. I absolutely love it. So easy to parody.
Not a guy from Bangkok or Thailand. That was just some white guy with a bit of a tan.
Oh, yeah, dude, you get that in all these films in the 80s. Like I said, none of the Russian guys are Russian, any of them. It's ridiculous.
Do you know the...
you watch that sequence, sorry, I'll just finish this quick, is how well that scene is put together. Like, the choreography is solid, but it's the people that surround them. Like, you can feel the sweat, you can feel the heat, and you can feel, like, how imposing that sequence is.
I was very uncomfortable with that scene because I'm a big personal space guy.
And that's why you're not getting that.
My God, there was no fucking room in that place. That really, really...
yeah, but they sold you on it, didn't they? Like I was watching, was it on Disney Plus yesterday, The Bear, which reminded me of Uncut Gems. That's what's called, the Adam Sandler film?
Yeah, Uncut Gems, yeah.
Yeah. And they have that ability in those films to shoot kind of like the intensity of working in the kitchen and people screaming and shouting, but being able to like maintain a sense of where you are.
That's why I stopped watching The Bear.
Oh, it's intense.
I stopped watching The Bear because the dude from the one who kept calling him cousin. Yeah, he fucking wound me up.
And he's supposed to. Like, it's supposed to be an unpleasant experience. And this isn't quite the same, but they managed to maintain the... Like, if you go back and watch a lot of 80s movies, like even Bloodsport, stuff like that, what gets lost is that sense of realism. Like, they have a fight, but the crowd never feels, like, legit to me in a lot of those films. Whereas you watch this and you never lose sight of the fight, the choreography is solid, but if you feel like you're there and it feels sweaty and uncomfortable, I was like, this it's just all the signs of this being a well-made, well-shot movie, even if, like you said earlier, it is dumb as shit, which I'm not going to argue.
Yeah, but it's, to me, again, it's not well shot, it's not well made.
Not well shot? Dude, I think that's
it's not though, is it? It's fucking, it's struggling a lot. Like, and
I think this is a good-looking film. I think it's a really good-looking film.
Yeah, I give that more to the backdrops than anything else. But I wanted a question, right? I wanted to ask you a question. Mm-hmm. You said about the director, right? And then we said that Sly might actually be the one who's ghost directing.
Yeah.
Whose ridiculous fucking idea was it to have Troutman and Rambo think that they had any chance with 2 AK-47s and 2 grenade rounds against the Russian convoy?
Yeah, it's pretty silly. I like the build up and like, oh, what should we do? And he's like, fuck them. And they've just got that conveniently little place trench where they can like jump into.
Yeah, that was stupid.
I guess you can make the argument that he's looking at the situation. He's like, well, we're dead. Like, if we give ourselves up, he's going to kill us. So we might as well go out, guns blazing, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. That's what I was thinking. And then they get saved, Two Towers style, where the Afghans all rock up and, they end up winning the day. It is silly. But like you said, I'm almost willing to go with it because by that point, so much happens so quick that I made a list of this.
Before you say
go for it.
Do you think it's too quick though? It feels so rushed. It feels so quick. It feels like all of a sudden they've realized they're running out of time, so they got to fit everything in, and it feels really, really compressed. And
100%.
Yeah, you have like a headache by the end of it.
No, I totally agree. And what happens is you lose all the nuance. I mean, we can mention about how politically insane, the politics of this film have aged really bizarrely. Like, don't get me wrong, the Russians being the bad guys, that's back in vogue. Yeah. However, the Afghans being the heroes, that doesn't play so well nowadays. But, it's a timepiece from the 80s, whatever. But at the start, and I know the whole film is supposed to be about him saving Troutman. But really, at the start, you're getting that build-up between him and fighting for the Afghans. And it's hinting at a more politically and interesting film, and maybe one with a bit more character to it. And I actually think the movies at its strongest from a narrative perspective is when he's on screen with Musa. I think Musa, played by an actor called Sanson Gabai, who's actually Israeli, and looks, I know you're not a football guy, but fuck me, he looks like Mo Salah. It's unbelievable how much that dude looks like Mo Salah.
I'll take your word for it. I don't even know who Mo Salah is.
You don't know Mo Salah?
You just said I'm not a football guy. How the fuck?
But Mo Salah's so famous. I thought you'd go beyond that. Like,
why is he so famous? If he comes on as on an advert,
why is he so famous? Because he's one of the best footballers in the world.
If he comes on an advert, any kind of advert for a credit card or what fucking ever, I'm not going to know that's the footballer Mo Salah. So unless I'm watching something like a sports show or something, and they go, "Oh, this is Mo Salah," I'm not going to know that guy could walk past me in the street and I wouldn't know who he is.
Yeah, but I still can't. Footballers. I'm not saying that he's quite in that category, but like, I know you're not a football guy, but you know Cristiano Ronaldo is, you know Messi is, you know who like Steven Gerrard is, like, footballers. I just thought he was at that level whereby, like, there's loads of TV shows I don't know jack shit about, but by osmosis, you couldn't even tell where you know that person from. You just do because their name is so prevalent in popular culture. I just assume
who you're talking about.
Well, anyway, he looks like Mo Salah. It doesn't matter. But my point being is that the stuff with Rambo and I call him Mo Salah and Musa, is when the movie's at its best, because it's like he's like the fish out of water, and instead of playing it for laughs, Rambo's not doing one-liners there. He's just reacting to Musa, and the actor's fantastic in that sequence. And there's like one silly little throwaway line when he's showing him all his guns, and he's like, "What's this?" And he's like, "A blue light." And he's like, "What does it do?" Shines blue. And it's like this really dry delivery, which runs in complete contrast to the horrible, awkward one-liners at the end of the film with Troutman. But my point is that all that stuff gets lost. All the kind of, the relationship between Rambo and the Afghans, the relationship between Rambo and Musa, or who's the kid? Hamid. Like, that all gets lost. And it just becomes silly because, like you said, from the moment he picks up that fucking goat, the movie's like, all right, we've got a rocket up our ass and we are not stopping until we see the credits.
Yeah. Do you know Hamid, right? Do you think Sly was watching Mad Max Part 2 and thought, you know what, this film needs its own feral kid?
Maybe. Yeah, he feels kind of pointless in this film.
Yeah. Same with the feral kid.
The only thing he does is he fucks up the infiltration sequence. Like, he shows up to, like, set off the alarm. And they try and play it off like he has a relationship at the end when he gives him his necklace. And it just feels pointless because you're like, wait, you have no relationship with this kid. None.
At one point, I missed the kid getting injured. I must have looked away or something.
Yeah.
But the next time I look up on screen, Rambo's got him over his shoulder just like he's a bag of potatoes. And he's just running.
Might as well be.
And he's just running then away from, like I said, the whole Russian army.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what happened to this kid? Why is this? And then no sooner have they gotten in there, they've had to get back out so he can send the kid on his way. Then this other random dude shows up with 2 horses. Then that random dude gets shot. Then Rambo pulls out a rocket launcher from I don't know where, probably the same place he had his fucking...
Yeah, that is weird, yeah.
Then he fires the rocket launcher in the most uncomfortable way I've ever seen. Like, it's not on his shoulder, it's kind of just on his forearm.
Yeah, it's not convincing.
Yeah. And then he goes back into the fucking thing. And I was thinking, fucking hell, what's going on? Why have you brought these characters in just to bring him into the place? Go back out of the place. You go back into the place on your own. What the fuck is going on?
Well, they just, like you said, they don't have enough time. It's weird because halfway through this film, I can't decide, looking back, if it becomes awesome or if it becomes kind of silly. And it depends on, well, a bit of both, I suppose. And it depends on what you're looking for. From a narrative perspective, and I keep coming back to the sports scene, the Buzkashi scene, which I think is important because of that sequence, it's a brilliantly shot sequence where he cuts between the sport and the incoming attack of the helicopters coming in. Yeah. And obviously you can see that Stallone's being held up on the horse as he reaches down for the goat, but it still looks cool. You have that amazing score playing at the time. And then the attack comes. And it's like it humanizes the Afghans. You think, oh, they're building that relationship. But what actually happens is it just abandons narrative. It abandons that brilliant relationship they've been building up between Rambo and Musa. And it's just like, well, we're just going to be an action sequence nonstop now.
You know what that random game felt like as well? It's just, obviously, you make games up, don't you? So that's a game they just made up now and they want to play it.
No, that's the Afghan national sport.
Is it?
Yeah. And they play similar sports in Kazakhstan, like different versions of it.
Okay.
But it is.
Well, I'm still going to tell my story anyway. But it just makes me like when me and my brother were growing up, we always came up with random little games as well, just games that no. And I don't know, have I ever told you what Brick Wars?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have told you.
How could I forget about Brick Wars?
Okay. So,
and by the way, to anyone listening, Brick Wars is exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah. So when we were growing up and we lived not far from a quarry, we would play Brick Wars, which is just throwing house bricks at each other. And to be fair, until you told me that was a national sport, that's what that game felt like. They just picked up a dead goat and thought, you know what, the first person to run around this circle and then put the goat over there wins. It's like my brother one day, as the oldest, picked up a brick and went, right, first person to get hit by this loses.
Yeah, well, basically all sports are that, and just some catch on. And obviously one day they were on horses. It's like, we'll pick up a goat, we'll drop it in here. And it's just evolved from there. Same with football. It's just a shame that Brick Wars just never got past the launching pad stage.
You become so famous, apparently somebody that thinks football is the worst game in the world is meant to know who you are in the street.
Yeah, well, I reckon 99% of people in the UK probably have at least heard of most of it, but it doesn't matter. It was like we played this game where we all had, what are they called? Dennis the Menace has got the fuckers. Slingshots. I said crossbow in my head because of what we said earlier. Slingshots. And we had this game where it was Slingshot Wars, and we just put stones in the slingshots. And of course, we played just the once, and we played until the inevitable happened. I split someone's head open, and they had to go to the hospital. And we're like, okay, we probably shouldn't play Slingshot Wars. And the same thing gladly happened with you and Brick Wars.
No.
Obviously. No, you played a little longer.
It wasn't just, it's me and my brother. We live next to a quarry.
Well, at least it didn't. Thank God it didn't catch on. That's all
I lost the first round. I was stupid enough after I came back to have stitches to want to play again because I wanted to get my brother back.
That is unbelievable. But I can understand that. You always want to get your brother back. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I listed, right? There's hardly any narrative to the second half of this film. So from the moment he picks up that goat and you get the music, the Russians attack immediately. Then you go straight into the Rambo infiltration sequence. Then you go into a separate sequence, which is Rambo escapes when things go to shit. Then you have the amazing, and I do still love it, the cauterize scene. Like when I was younger, that was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen, where he gets that, the ultimate action movie injury. It's always on the side, down the bottom, just away from internal organs. So it hurts, but he can still do everything and it's not going to kill him. But that bit when he kind of put the gunpowder through his side and then lights it, I've still never seen anything like that, ever.
He put the gunpowder in the back, lit it, and then it shot through the front.
Yeah, just because it's badass. And do you know what? The only sequence I could think, because I was like, do they do that in other action movies where the guy gets himself kind of like, does it out in the field? And the only thing I could think was the Predator did it in the first Predator film. Yeah. It's where he puts the thing on. Oh, have you?
Yeah. There's a film called Black Dog with Patrick Swayze where he's...
Oh, I know the one, yeah. I've not seen it, but I know the film.
So he's a long haul trucker, and it turns out he's hauling weapons he didn't know he was hauling, and he gets shot in the arm.
Okay.
So he puts gunpowder on, and then this random guy, Randy Travis, the singer Randy Travis.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Goes up to Patrick Swayze and said, "Oh, where did you do time? Because you learned the gunpowder trick in prison."
That doesn't make any sense.
Nope.
That doesn't make...
Nope.
I get Rambo knowing it, but anyway, that scene is badass. And he goes straight from that into, let's be clear, infiltration part 2, because he goes in, doesn't save Troutman, so they have to escape. As soon as he escapes, they decide he's got to go back in. So they basically redo that sequence. They have escape part 2. Then they have that classic Rambo sequence in the cave. Then they have Rambo against Giant Russian, who isn't actually that giant, which might be the silliest scene in the movie where he drops down and he blows up, but it's fucking awesome. Then you have Rambo and Troutman versus the Russian army, including the tank versus helicopter sequence, which, again, I think is shot brilliantly. It's dumb because why isn't, like, he's shooting at the helicopter, can't hit shit, and they basically just have like a Fast and Furious style face off. But that sequence looks amazing.
Amazing. I'll give you, I said it wasn't shot the best. I'll give it to you. When you see the Russian army just come around the corner in the desert, that made me laugh. It's the fucking desert and they came around the corner.
Well, that happens throughout the film. How many times does that, and I forgot the actual name of the helicopter, but how many times did that helicopter sneak up on people in the desert? Like, everyone's just like, nobody hears shit, and then it's just next to them. I was like, come on, dude, that the helicopter must be loud as
Which is funny as fuck, because apparently that helicopter shows up like quick snap whenever it's needed, unless you need time to put your bow and arrow together, and then for all of a sudden it's traveling from the other side of Afghanistan.
Doesn't he say at that point that he needs to refuel? Is that like the reason that he like? There's a scene in the sequence when he's like, you have to go back and refuel in his
because when
accent.
When he's doing that rushing, not Russian. He's rushing to put the crossbow together. I use fucking crossbow. The bow and arrow together. Mm-hmm. It intercuts with the pilot or the massive Russian. So he's coming towards him. I got to snap this into place. Or I got to put this string on. I'm still. Where the fuck did that come from?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of show. But that is the thing. It is ludicrous. The second half of this film really is the height of stupidity in many respects, but it is also awesome. Like, there's a lot of money thrown at this. You can see it up on the screen. I know we disagree on it, but I think it's well shot. I think Sly looks absolutely fantastic. It is a bit of a shame that it's lost any of the nuance that came from the first film. But if you're looking for a genuinely mindless 80s action movie, this is like right up there. Because as I said, people compare it to Commando. This is a much better made movie than Commando. Not as fun, but much better made in terms of like throwing. And one of the things that's so fun about rewatching these films, and I think I can speak for both of us here, one of the reasons we love these 80s movies so much is that they're never happening again. Ever. You are never getting back. Not only, and I don't mean that just in terms of they'll never make an R-rated action movie, the most expensive movie of all time. That's never going to happen. It'll always be a PG or something because they're going to make the money back. But the tone, because if you made this now, you've got to have a wink. There's got to be, even if you're trying not to, there'll always be that element of self-awareness. You need that actor to think he's that awesome. You need all that money, all that vanity, all that cocaine, which you mentioned a bunch of times. Yeah. It just makes these movies totally unique. And we can, movies can go on for another 300-400 years. There will never be another movie like Rambo 3 because it's so intrinsically linked to the 80s.
The 80s was its own special decade for film.
100%.
Especially with action films and things like that. There's no way in hell you are getting away with, and I'm not saying it was right back then, but you're not getting away with now having a film that has no female characters except for two women that are locked in a prison cell.
Yeah, they're the only two in the whole film.
So you're not getting away with that now. Absolutely not. It's just... And I'm saying it's right, but I'm saying the 80s are doing things now that you wouldn't get away with. The way they treat women in the 80s films, the way they treat a lot, like just everything about the 80s was
but even
male focused.
The male focus and the political. I just mean in terms of, I think purely the tone, because everything's too self-aware now. There's a certain naivety to 80s movie making. And it's like I said, it's not just action movies. It's stuff like, I mentioned before, Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah.
I think it's too sweet for modern audiences. It just wouldn't get made.
You're not going to get the bigger than life characters, the larger than life characters now. Like these guys are above everything else. Like your action hero now or your character now has to be flawed. Has to have some sort of flaw, has to be humanized. Back then, again, they were larger, like fucking Rambo trying to humanize himself, but that's not going to happen because he kills countries. Do you know what I mean? So it just doesn't.
He does. At least he does look a little bit sad about it. And as I said, I actually think they got the balance. That's why I think Rambo 4 is such a great movie, because it is, in many respects. I know it's it's almost 15 years ago now. It's a much more modern movie, but it still captured that sense of like Rambo still being Rambo.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Would Rambo 4 get made now? Perhaps not.
No,
maybe it is just on the edge.
No,
where he just kills Burma.
Yeah. So I know we're going to need to move on. We've been talking about an hour already, but I know we'll get to it in a soundtrack as well, but I wanted to bring it up. What an odd choice for an end credit song. Even odder than Body Count by Body Count in
No, it's not. It's not as weird as I don't think because I forgot about the end credit song in this film, and it does catch you off guard, and it is weird. I don't think anything has caught me as off guard as Body Count in Universal Soldier. I don't think anything's going to top that.
It was close, but I appreciate what they're trying to do. Oh yeah, to Rambo. Troutman is his brother, but he ain't heavy. He's my brother.
It just doesn't work, especially when the rest of the score is all kind of orchestral, and the score is very good. And we'll talk about that in a moment in music. But the end credit sequence is really strange. But to bring it back to Troutman before we move on, is Troutman's job in all three movies just to tell people how much of a badass Rambo is? I mean, as far as I can tell, he's basically just Rambo's hype man. Like, you know, who do you think this man is? God? No, God would have mercy. He won't. And even like when he gets his gun at the end of the film, he's like, oh, Troutman's going to be a badass. He's as useful as a a warm fart on a cold day. It's just he's terrible. He's a terrible. As soon as he crosses into the border, he gets captured. He's apparently useless even when he's with Rambo. Other than talking at Rambo, I do not know what Troutman does.
It's funny, isn't it, when they go right, like Rambo shows up and he goes, "Oh, this is the famous Rambo. He doesn't look like anything to me." You got Troutman in the back going, "Ooh, you did it now!
Oh, you just say that about Rambo, bro." Yeah. Rambo's a badass, bro, let me tell you.
Let me tell you about something that happened 10 years ago with Rambo. Rambo will kick your ass. Like, fuck, you know.
Yeah, I just imagine coming like, yo, give it up for Rambo, give it up for Rambo, motherfuckers. You know, it's just like, Troutman.
He's Jimmy Hart, isn't he? He is Jimmy Hart.
He is Jimmy. It's just like, I felt like he had the opportunity in this film. And they hint towards it about showing Troutman as a soldier. But like I said, the start of the film, he gets captured almost immediately. And at the end, it's just like he shoots one guy, like Rambo in the cave. Looks like he's being just about caught out because Rambo kills like 20 dudes. Troutman is just standing there watching him like, oh, he is good, isn't he? And then shoots one dude at the end. But other than that, I mean, Troutman...
He shoots a dude in the back as well.
Yeah, he does shoot him in the back. Yeah, well, he's a terrible soldier. He's a great hype man, terrible soldier.
All right, unless you've got nothing else to say, should we move on to favourite scene?
Sure.
You go first.
Oh, you want me to go? It's either the opening sequence, which I still love, and I think is perhaps the most iconic sequence in the film, or the Rambo going old school in the cave, followed by the fight with the Russian. If I dare, combine the two, I think it's probably the cave sequence because I think that is the closest we get to classic Rambo. Okay. But it's hard to look past that. Really, when I think of Rambo 3, I think of him doing the headband with the camera behind. I think of that fantastic turnaround with the musical cue, as ridiculous it is, and that fantastic fight in the very sweaty looking. I don't know. They're not in an arena, are they? Just in some fucking hut, wherever. But it just looks fantastic.
It looks like they're on a dock, isn't it? They're in some sort of
dock. Yeah. So I do love the kind of throwback sequence in the cave, and part of the infiltration's cool, but it probably is that opening sequence for me.
I'm going to say the opening sequence, like when he dips his hands in the peanut butter and then puts it into the jelly beans, and oh no, wait, that's Hot Shots again. No, that is the take up of Kickboxer, isn't it? Rather than this. So they've mixed Kickboxer with
yeah.
But no, the opening sequence is good. But I did have a question about the opening sequence. Again, it's probably what you like to call just a Rob thing. Mm-hmm. But when you get him putting a headband on, you get a shot of his back. Mm-hmm. Where's all his scars from First Blood Part 2? When they strap him up and they torture him, you can see that he's got loads of scars on his back from his Vietnam days.
Is this something? When I think of scars with Rambo, I always think of the scars on his front, and you can still see those very clearly.
But no, he had a load on his back as well.
That seems weird that if they were loads on his back, because they really got out of their way to show them in, like they're on his chest, there's one on his face.
Well, yes, because they made put like the scar on his right arm caused by falling through the tree was there. The small scar above his left cheek, where when they rubbed the knife from First Blood Part 2 across.
Yeah.
But for some reason, all the scars on his back, he miraculously...
It just looked too awesome. That back doesn't deserve any scars. It's a fantastic back, isn't it? He is unbelievable fucking shape in this film.
He did a couple of lat pull downs and just fucking caused that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, like famously, they talk about Predator, where everybody was like working out between kind of scenes just so they could all be the most kind of shredded. You're never going to beat Arnold Schwarzenegger in 1988, was it? Wait, when was Predator?
85,
85? No, it wasn't 85. I'm going to say 87.
I'll go with it.
You look into it. But anyway, he is looking maybe as good as he's ever looked, I think, in this film. Some people would argue even for First Blood Part 2, because that was, I think, the same year as Rocky IV, and he is shredded in those films. But he looks, when I think of Rambo, as much as I prefer the first film, when I think of Rambo, I just see Rambo 3. That's what I see.
It was 87 for Predator.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah. In terms of loves, number one, the poster for me, just Stallone being there larger than life. I think it is for me at least, one of the most iconic posters of the 80s. And when I think of it, I think of it as being one of like the VHS sleeves. You know, like if I was going to pick like 10 VHS sleeves for me, which kind of summed up the 80s, this would be on, you know, along with Back to the Future, maybe Gremlins and stuff. I would have Rambo 3 for sure.
I'm going to have to rein you in at some point and say, when you do Loves and Hates, pick the fucking film, not things connected to it. Oh, do you know what I love about Rambo 3? The poster. The poster. This is better.
This is better. Number 2, the cauterizing scene. Like, you just don't. I said you don't get many scenes as similar to the Pred scene. I still think that's the best one. Like, I remember it so clearly. Like, it's not just the cauterizing, because that's what everyone remembers. It's the fact that he has to put. I'm not sure if it's like a bit of stick that's gone through him or whatever it is, or a bit of the grenade.
No, so he was chucked through the door, so there's a bit of rebar, I think.
Okay. Well, it's like he has to push it through by putting his thumb in his own back and pushing out the front. It's actually pretty gross. And, you know, we mentioned in this film, for all the kills and stuff, the violence is relatively reserved. It's not particularly gross. There's not loads of blood, but that sequence does not fuck around at all. And number 3, Stallone's look. The hair, the shape on him, like I mentioned earlier, is civilian's clothes, which is surprisingly ace for 1988. I just think he absolutely looks the part. When I say the part, does he look ridiculous? Absolutely, with the hair and the headband and everything. But as Rambo, he just looks perfect in terms of encapsulating what it means to be an 80s action star. Like, more so than maybe anyone else. Like if you were say making a poster for like what represents 80s culture, even before you put Schwarzenegger on there, I think the first thing a lot of people would put on that poster is like Rambo 3 era Stallone. I really think it is.
Get over the posters, fuck, you know.
No, I just think in terms of what iconography sums up the 80s better than most. I'm not on about the poster here. I'm just talking about his look with the headbands and everything.
Yeah.
Like, I think it is one of the most 80s things ever.
That's my number 1, to try and actually rein you back in, because when you came up with Loves and Hates, it was quickfire love and hate, and you've never done quickfire love and hate.
No, sometimes I do. There's no middle ground with me. It's either quick or very long and drawn out. So apologies.
Anyway, for number 1, I was agreeing with you. It was quintessential Rambo. The look of Rambo, just Stallone looks fantastic as Rambo in this film. For anything else about this film, I think he looks great in it. And so he's number 1 for me. Number 2 is the setting. I think Afghanistan looks great. I mean, I've never known.
Wait, is this shot in Israel? I think a lot of it.
I'm not too sure.
Yeah, well, I know it's not actually Afghanistan, but it does look the part at least.
I've never known a desert to have so many corners for you to hide behind. But other than that, I think it looks great. And number 3 is the cave sequences. Like, it just feels claustrophobic and it feels dangerous. But I've never known, like...
That's when he feels like a proper killer. Because once you put a gun in his hand, it all looks ridiculous. Because it's like the stormtrooper effect. You're like, well, no one else is a decent shot. If anyone was a decent shot, he's standing out in the open, often, like you said, in the middle of a desert. How is nobody hitting him? But when it's like people are just, you know, and he's in the shadows, like this fucking tiger, that's when he's at his best. And that's when he's at his scariest, I think.
I'm going to go straight into my hates, because as much as I said I love the cave sequences... One of my biggest hates was the fact that how many times they tied a rope around a fucking boulder that should have just gone through the hole. Like, that was holding so many people's weight.
Yeah, no, I got you. It's pretty ridiculous.
The second one for me was how quick it moved. The pace was like, and I'm all right with a quick movie, but Jesus Christ, the pace of this was insane. After, I guess, the goat playing scene, as you said, like, it was absolutely 100% insane. Like, at some point, you're like, wait, wasn't he just in there? But now he's not in there. But now he's
everything kind of becomes slightly as fun as it is, and I do think it is very fun. Everything becomes oddly irrelevant in the second half of the film for that reason.
And lastly, for me, was the fact that even though it's Rambo, there should be some explanation about where he's pulling these weapons from. Like, where the fuck did the rocket launch come from? Where did the bow and arrow come from? And
the bow and arrow is definitely the most egregious one, because it's in its own suitcase. And I was really like it feels like with the grenade launcher, he could have theoretically picked it up off the ground or something. And that one never grabbed me. I did notice it in this one, but it was really the bow and arrow. And the strangest thing to me was that I never noticed it before. Like, I watched this film loads when I was a kid, and it was only watching it this time. I was like, wait, where the hell did he get the goddamn bow and arrow from?
You're channeling your inner Rob.
Yeah, maybe. I'm looking out for these things. What can I really shit on? What pointless moment in the film can I really go two-footed on? It's that, the bow and arrow. In terms of hates, mine are going to be a lot quicker. Troutman being kind of useless. Number 2, the giant Russian not being that giant. And number 3, as fun as it is, it's too far removed from the exceptional original for my taste. As I said, I appreciate that they've gone that far with this film, unlike the second film, which trying to be a bit of both. This film is so far removed, which kind of works for it, but also makes me a little bit disappointed as to what those movies could have been if they kept maybe a little bit, like tonally, kept one foot in the door in regards to First Blood.
Do you think you made the right choice by replacing Superman with this for this week's choice?
Oh, 100%. I'm really glad I rewatched it. I like you said, we had to do it because if you're doing an 80s movies podcast, this is like one of the first films I think of. Because as I said, I think it's so incredibly 80s.
Which is really bizarre to me. Then when you think of the 80s films, Rambo 3 is up there for you. It's so bizarre to me.
Well, no, when I say it's up there and it'll show out in the score, I don't think it's one of the best ones. And even when I grew up, I knew it wasn't a fantastic film.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just, and I know I mentioned the poster a bunch of times, but it's like the poster, I can just see it on the VHS in the store, like back when I was younger.
I mean,
and maybe it is down to the fact that I think this was that kind of swan song for this kind of film. So it's almost got like a special place in my heart, despite the fact that it's not good. It's what it is to me. It's more iconic than it is good, if that makes sense.
I get that. I mean, I already told you last week about the fact that I went through a stage of watching just the sequels because that's all I had on VHS. And we all know my 80s movie history with things like The Wraith and Buckaroo Banzai and things like that. So, so I'm not going to... It's still bizarre to me that Rambo 3 would be up there for you, but I'm not going to hold that against you when we've already just like fucking Garbage Pail Kids and things like that for me. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, but I still think like with like you compare it to the Wraith and stuff. It's like when you think of Sylvester, like we think of 80s movie stars, like Sylvester Stallone's right up there with Schwarzenegger, obviously. And when you think of Stallone, I still think of obviously Rocky and Rambo.
Yeah,
and I know it's not the best film, but I still think of this film, and I bring it back to that word iconography. And we mentioned it with a bunch of films. I think you brought it up first with like stuff like Beverly Hills Cop. It's like we always remember the first film because it's the best one, but a lot of the most iconic stuff actually happens in the inferior sequels. It happened with what was the comedy we did? Weekend at Bernie's. Weekend at Bernie's 2 is rubbish, I think, but a lot of the stuff people actually remember is from the second film, and I think there's an element of that with this film. It's not the best Rambo film by any stretch of the imagination, but when I think of Rambo, I keep coming back to this.
You would definitely like the headband, the bow and arrow, things like that. You would definitely
fight in Afghanistan. It's just like the budget, everything about it.
He didn't get them till the sequels. Like he didn't have a headband. He didn't have a bow and arrow in the first one.
No. Well, like you said, the first one isn't an 80s film. It's not Rambo as he's portrayed in popular culture anymore. Yeah. The portrayal of Rambo in popular culture is totally First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3. It's got nothing to do with First Blood at all. That is what it is. Do we have alternative titles? We've already mentioned the fact that, the series has got an array of absolutely bonkers titles. But did anyone actually call this First Blood Part 3, for instance?
No, but a lot. There's only 3 that I picked up on. Like it's Rambo 3 across the board, pretty much. Okay. But there was 3 that were, and again, it could be translation, but when you translate them to English, they're bonkers.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll start off with my least favorite, and I'll move up to my favorite. So my least favorite is Finland, Rambo 3, Fighter.
Finland often pop up in this. There's got to be something to do with the language there. Absolutely garbage, but fair enough. Yeah.
My second favorite is Vietnam, Rambo 3, Unsuccessful Sword Guard.
Yeah, that is bonkers. That is truly bonkers.
Yeah.
So what the hell beats Unsuccessful Sword Guard?
Well, I mean, God bless them. It's Japan.
Okay, go for it.
Rambo 3, Angry Afghan.
I mean, I love it. I'm not sure it makes any sense whatsoever, but yeah, I'll go with Rambo 3, Angry Afghan. I mean, you could probably sneak it in if you were talking about, if you were talking to someone who knew nothing about the Rambo films and said, these are what they're called. So they're called First Blood, then it's Rambo First Blood Part 2, then it's Rambo 3, Angry Afghan, then it's just Rambo, then it's Rambo Last Blood, it might be so weird that they wouldn't have picked up that Rambo 3 was called Rambo 3 Angry Afghan, and maybe they just accept it. I don't know, but that's still pretty good all the same.
Yeah.
Do you have any facts for this film?
I do have some facts. You want to go into insane, and there's a reason. Like you've mentioned it a few times, this is the highest budget for an action film, an R-rated film for a while. Yeah.
Well, it was just the highest grossing. Sorry, not the highest grossing. It actually didn't do that well at the box office. It made up. It made more.
It made more worldwide than it did just in the US.
Oh, in America, it wasn't. Yeah. But it was the most expensive film ever made at the time.
I wonder why. Maybe because as part of his pay, Sylvester Stallone asked for a Gulfstream jet worth $12 million, and they got him one.
That's the brilliance of it. No wonder they wanted to move on so quickly to a different brand of action hero. It was like it got that ludicrous where there's just like, well, he's the star. He's basically the movie. And people have to remember, especially if you're a younger listener, that nowadays films are sold on as being a franchise. It's like, oh, it's sold as being a Marvel film, or it's sold as whatever, or as Pirates of the Caribbean, even looking a few years back. Back in the 80s, it was just the name. It was just you put a name above a poster, and then you would just sell the film, whatever the fuck it was. You'd go and see it because that's Schwarzenegger there. The only person who's arguably doing that now is Tom Cruise, maybe, but even he has to rely on Mission Impossible. But it was like back then, if you're like in the film industry and you've got like Stallone, you're like, well, we're selling this as a Stallone film above all else. So if he wants a plane, he gets a fucking plane. And also, of course, cocaine and all that shit.
That felt like you were baiting me then as well. I'm not going to bite.
I know. But no, even if you do disagree, he is maybe the only person still doing it, where his name is bang at the top. Yeah. You know, we've mentioned before, DiCaprio's still doing it, but it's not the same kind of film as this.
John Rambo's horse also appeared in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as Indiana's horse.
That's awesome.
There you go.
That's so fucking cool.
They shared the same horse. During filming, Sylvester Stallone had a close call with a spinning helicopter rotor blade. In fact, had he been struck, it would have certainly decapitated him. Jesus Stallone Christ. Laughed off the near miss with the quip, at least I'd have saved a fortune on haircuts and hats, dude.
At least he was self-aware.
We already said Richard Crenna later appeared in Hot Shots Part 2, which is a parody of the Rambo series. Before taking the part, Crenna approached Sylvester Stallone for his opinion and blessing, something Stallone was more than happy to give. Director Peter McDonald stated in a DVD commentary that for the scenes involving Rambo and Colonel Troutman inside the monk's temple, the temple itself was a real temple in Thailand, undergoing renovation at the time of filming. Also, many of the monk extras were in fact real monks from that very temple, who were paid to appear as extras for those scenes. McDonald also went on to say how delighted he was to give money to people who really needed it, as opposed to people who had too much of it.
Fair enough. And again, those sequences, like shot on location, they just look good. Like you can't fake that. You know, we mentioned before with CG and stuff. There's a reason this movie still looks great. It's because they put all the money into real effects, and you can totally see it on screen. Some films you see it and you're like, oh, this film cost 150 million. Like, where did the money go? You watch this film, you're like, oh yeah, I can see where that fucking money went. 100%.
Original director Russell McKay was replaced after 2 weeks of filming due to creative differences. 3 cinematographers also left. The Soviet Spetsnaz troops are wearing the same Hollywood knockoff camouflage pattern outfits as seen on the Soviet paratroopers in Red Dawn. An approximation of the Soviet KLMK pattern, supposedly based on poor black and white photos of the genuine uniforms in use. What else have we got here? The problems that the Russian forces face with American Stinger missiles supplied to the Mujahideen fighters as described in this Mujahideen. I thought the J was silent, but okay. Mujahideen fighters, as described in this movie, were very real and accounted for the downing and destruction of hundreds of Russian helicopters during the real war. The missile was used by Pakistan against better flown Indian aircraft and gunships in the 1999 cargo war, but only accounted for 1 kill out of several hundred launches.
Definitely.
Sylvester Stallone ranked his performance in the Rambo film series as his third best.
In this film, yeah?
When Sylvester Stallone ranked his preferences, not performance, of the Rambo films, he ranked this one third.
Yeah, same as me. So did he rank it First Blood, surely?
It doesn't say.
I think I really wouldn't be surprised if it was the same. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it was First Blood, Rambo 3, First Blood Part 2, and then... Well, I'm saying that because that's my order, but I really think that's how he might go.
I can't tell you when he was on the Graham Norton show, so it might be before Last Blood as well. Because if it was after
he's
last,
not going himself
in that first, isn't he?
Oh, no way, no fucking way. That one's rough.
What else have we got here? Nothing major. No, we'll move
legacy.
On.
Well, I mean, one of the big legacies, I mentioned earlier the fact that it's iconic, and I think a big part of that as well is just how much it was parodied. We obviously Hot Shots Part 2 is a big part of that, but I mean, Hot Shots Part 2 in large parts is just Rambo 3. I mean, it was also parodied in Gremlins 2, and I actually went to see a stage show in Edinburgh as part of the festival. And this dude, it wasn't called Rambo 3. It was just like an American action guy or something like that. Yeah. And he was basically doing a one-man show. But he basically just did Rambo 3. And I was looking around the crowd and they were quite young. And I was like, I wonder how many people realize he's just doing Rambo 3. He does it from start to finish, but it's not called Rambo 3. But it shows how easily this film's parodied. Like, he does Colonel Troutman's fantastic full circle speech. He's trying to convince him to go back into the fray. You're going to come full circle, that shit. He, up on stage, delivered that whole speech verbatim, but played it for laughs. But he still did it seriously. And I was like, ha ha ha. I'm like, that's just from the film. And the only thing with that, I saw, as I walked in, the guy who was doing the show eyeball fucked me straight away, because I walk in, I'm 6'7", and I was like, I said to my mate as soon as he walked through the door, I saw him look at me, I looked at my friend, I was like, I'm going up on stage. He goes, what do you mean? I was like, I will bet you the farm that dude is going to drag me up on stage. And of course, you know what he dragged me up on stage for? To be the big Russian. Yeah. Of course, I knew all the fucking lines to the movie as well, so I absolutely slayed it up there. But the point being is that it wasn't called Rambo 3. It was just called American Action Hero. And he basically just redid the plot to this movie. It's so fucking easy to parody. We already mentioned it's the most expensive movie of all time. As I said, it does represent the end of the 80s for me in terms of the big action heroes. Like this was the most expensive movie. It was overtaken, just a year or two later by Total Recall. And you're like, oh, well, that's a Schwarzenegger film. But already in that film, it was sci-fi. He kept his clothes on. Like, I was thinking about Total Recall. He didn't need to be Schwarzenegger.
Wait. You can't just skate over that. Is that how you define an 80s action film? If they take their clothes off?
No. My point is, right, if you're doing, say, Commando or you're doing Rambo, you have to look like Stallone or you have to look like Schwarzenegger. So
you've got to take your clothes off.
We do have to take your clothes off. You've got to be cut. You've got to be this big, large-than-life guy. Like, the fact that Schwarzenegger is in Total Recall is almost incidental. Like, he's almost playing just a dude. I know he gets into a few fights and stuff, but you could have, John Cusack could have been in Total Recall. He absolutely could have. Yeah. John Cusack couldn't be fucking Rambo. So that's what I mean. Even the big action stars were kind of moving away, even just a year or so later. So like I said, I really do think it's the end of the era for the big muscle man action hero in many respects.
Yeah, I'm sticking to the fact that you got to be an action star if you take your clothes off.
Well, I mean, it's not far from the truth, is it? It's not far from the truth. I mentioned earlier, this really is one of the VHSs in my mind and one of the best posters. It didn't do all that well at the cinema, and a big part of that is probably down to the fact that it was like a holdover from the Cold War. The Cold War was coming to an end. Russia were no longer the bad guys, and suddenly they're pushing this on you again. It's like, why do we care? Everyone cared in 1985 when he was making Rocky IV. No one gave a shit in 88. So it was a different political landscape as well.
If you're going on about politics and Russians being the bad guy, you probably could do Rambo 3 again.
Oh, you probably could come. You'd have to just change the Afghans, I suppose. Yeah. I mentioned the fact that it's got one of the best weapons in movie history with the knife and with the crossbow. It's also got one of the really low-key cool watches. You only see it once where he looks at it. It's not like a James Bond sequence, but it's a Chronosport UDT C-Quartz analog digital diver's watch, and it's totally badass. And I looked it up. It costs a fucking fortune. One of the strangest things is obviously the movie's relationship with Afghanistan. And at the end of the film, it's dedicated to the brave people of Afghanistan. But there's still an urban legend that holds sway to this day that the original cut actually said that it was dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters. And that was updated quietly after September the 11th attacks. That's not true. It always said that. But to this day, people still go on about it. And one other thing, this movie helped solidify that kind of the battle between Schwarzenegger and Stallone, because they used the poster, I keep coming back to the poster, for Rambo 3 in Twins, and Schwarzenegger stands in front of it and mocks it by holding his muscles up. So yeah, there's that as well. But that's about it for Legacy. In terms of score and soundtrack, you've already mentioned that they bizarrely use Bill Medley's version of "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother" over the end credits.
Yeah,
and you are right. It is insane.
Like, where the fuck does that come from?
I have no idea. And it's strange because the rest of the score is created by Oscar-winning composer Jerry Goldsmith, who was
great score, by the way.
Well, that's the thing. There was a score created by the Oscar-winning composer Jerry Goldsmith, conducted using the Hungarian State Opera Orchestra, but hardly any of it was used. And instead, they recycled the score used in First Blood Part 2, which was admittedly also created by Jerry Goldsmith. But it just means that the whole score subsequently sounds like a variation on the main theme. Don't get me wrong, it's an amazing main theme, and I think it sounds fantastic. But, you can imagine they've created this big, huge score for this film. They're like, no, we're just going to use that one tune from like the second film. We're just going to use it in perpetuity. Well, it's not quite as egregious as Broken Arrow, but they use it a lot.
Why ruin a good thing? It's a good theme.
Yeah, it is a great theme. The only thing I'll say is the use of that main theme is strangely implemented a few times because they go big with the score on occasion. Yeah. Like suddenly it really rises up. But they do it when like Rambo's running, but not really running from anything. Rambo pulling off a grate. I'm not sure if you remember that sequence where it's like they really lean it. All he's doing is pulling off a grate. It's like he's pulling off that grate for like 40 minutes. And the music just keeps rising and rising. And of course, the crescendo is him just moving the grate. It's a very, very odd sequence. But yeah, it's cool. It's iconic, but it's oddly implemented. The last one I've got, obviously, is video games. There are plenty of video games based on the movie. There's a few from Ocean, naturally. There were a whole bunch at the time, and Taito. But it's Sega's own Mega Drive version is the one most fondly remembered, for sure. And it's, again, the artwork for the video game is just the poster from the movie, but with that iconic Mega Drive kind of grid system from the early games. Yeah. And like I said, it was actually made by Sega. It's a really good game, which they did. Remember they made like a Moonwalker game? Yeah, that was actually, it wasn't like licensed by someone else. That was made by Sega. Absolutely bizarre. Other than that, there was an arcade shooter in 2008, which was really good. And there was a truly terrible first-person shooter, but it was on rails. And that was released in 2014 on the 360 and PS3 to very little fanfare, although if you want to buy today, quite expensive. In terms of a modern-day video game, and I alluded to this earlier, there's like a common misconception that Rambo is more like John Matrix, so that, the game should be just like a shooty bang bang game. But the reality is that there's a lot more stealth involved, and it's actually closer to, as I mentioned earlier, Metal Gear in terms of tone. So yeah, I mean, Metal Gear is still a Konami. So why not convince Kojima to make a Rambo game complete with dodgy 80s politics? You could even bring back Stallone and de-age his voice. We've mentioned that with a whole bunch of these movies in terms of would you want a sequel and all that jazz. These guys are too old. So it's like, I think the future is make a video game, whether it be Conan for Schwarzenegger, I don't want to pick fucking Conan, or Rambo for Stallone. Bring them back, bring in, it'd be amazing if they brought Kojima in for it, but they actually have Stallone do the voice work and they de-age him. I would love to see that. And partly, I just want to see Kojima do a Metal Gear Solid ripoff. I think it'd just be the ultimate fuck you to Konami, personally.
I like where you're thinking. I like where your head's at. I mean, you're completely wrong. It's a shoot, bang, bang game.
Oh, see, I get it.
It's a first-person shoot, bang, bang game. Do you remember Christ?
No. If you're going to do shoot, bang, bang, it at least has to be third person, because I want to see, with modern physics, I want to see the hair kind of moving around in the background.
I would make it a Crisis or Turok-esque style game, because you're in the jungle. I would take it back to the jungle, to be fair. I know this is more First Blood Part 2 than it is Rambo 3.
Oh no, but I think we'd comfortably say this is just a Rambo game we're talking about rather than Rambo.
And I would, because to me, you picture Rambo in the jungle. That's where you always picture Rambo. So I would make it do you remember Crisis, didn't you? Because Crisis had
I played them quite recently.
Crisis and Turok had the bow and arrow stuff as well.
Yeah, the bow and arrow in Crisis is one of the best.
But if you want to go third person, then you'd go like a skin of Horizon Zero Dawn. Anytime there's a bow and arrow in a film, we always go back to that.
See, I actually think the bow and arrow is better in the recent Tomb Raider games.
And the Tomb Raider games are now fantastic, yeah.
Maybe a bit closer to that. But But yeah, I'm thinking like Metal Gear Solid 6 in particular, which was more open world and was actually like was the first half in particular. It's set over 2 locations and it covers almost like jungle and desert.
The problem that I face with it, I'm not a fan of the Metal Gear games.
Oh, I fucking love them.
Like I remember playing the first one, and I tried to play the other ones, but the 90-minute cutscenes and
I get that. That is
you got to listen to the Colonel go on. And to be fair, the Colonel in Metal Gear is based on Troutman.
He is, but I will tell you this: if you're not a fan of Metal Gear for that reason, I implore you to try Metal Gear Solid 5 because there are still cutscenes, but it does away with nearly all of that, streamlines everything, and makes it much more of an open world survival game.
Kiefer Sutherland one.
Yeah. It's a much better. I'm not saying much better game because I love Metal Gear Solid 3, for instance. That's the one set in the jungle. But yeah, I'd love to see. Basically, like Kojima, I think is an absolute genius, and I would love it if he got his hands on the Rambo license. I think that would be something special.
Here's your conundrum, right? I like what you're saying that I should try that one, but out of protest, I won't because they replaced David Hayter with Kiefer Sutherland. David Hayter, who was who nobody knows him, but he
the people in video games do. He's one of the more famous just because of Solid Snake.
He wrote X-Men 1 or 2. He was a writer for that. But I love him, and I know him from Guy the Dark Hero.
Jesus Christ. You're the only person not playing Metal Gear because of Guy the Dark Hero. I will say, like, Kiefer Sutherland, unsurprisingly, is quite good as Solid Snake.
I'm not absolutely denying it. Like, I have no problem. Kiefer Sutherland is probably great, but do not fuck with Guyver.
Well, that's just abandon all that. Just get Kojima to do a Rambo game. Like, honestly, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, dude, a Rambo game made by Kojima would be fucking dope because you really could lean into the pot. Oh, doesn't matter. Anyway, scores and recommendations. For me, I think this is maybe the most 3-star film of all time. Like, it's the easiest 3-star ever for me. It does get dumb, it does get very silly, but it is super fun. I think it's really well directed. I think it looks great. I think Stallone's brilliant in it. But to give it anything more than 3 stars would be I'd be leaning too much into nostalgia there.
Yeah.
But would I recommend it? Yes, with the caveat, it's super 80s. But I think it holds up, especially the Blu-ray or I'm not sure if it has a 4K edition yet, but certainly on Blu-ray, this film looks brilliant. I don't think you need any caveats like, it's an 80s film, so it looks a certain way. It has pacing linked to the 80s. Tonally, it's an 80s film, but it looks brilliant. So yeah, I would recommend it, and I'd give it 3 stars.
I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, I'm glad I watched it, but I probably wouldn't go back and I wouldn't sing its praises. I wouldn't, and the pacing let it down, so it drops from a 3 to a 2 to me.
2. The thing is, I get it. Like, I'd be more surprised if you gave it a 4 than a 2, for instance. But in terms of recommending, I would recommend anyone to go and watch the first 4 Rambo films because I think it's a really weird. Outside of, again, not just naming conventions, in terms of tone, the only thing close to it is probably Fast and Furious. Like, it's all over the shop in terms of where it starts. Those middle 2 films, again, kind of end up all over the place. And then the 4th film is its own unique beast. They really are so different.
Show me on the doll where Rambo 5 touched you, because you are really upset with Rambo.
So bad.
Where did Rambo 5 touch you on this doll?
I went in and I was ready to support that film because I thought it was just being attacked because it was like at the start of the whole woke movement thing, which I don't have an issue with. Yeah. But I really thought it was on the receiving end of that because, let's be clear, it's always been a Republican favorite. He was quoted by George Bush Sr., wasn't he? Yeah. About, Rambo. And the whole idea that, especially Rambo First Blood Part 2, a big part of, certainly for Americans, was that he went in and undid the wrongs of the Vietnam War. He went back and the Americans won because of Rambo. So it's like, in many respects, it's a Republican's wet dream. And I thought it was being criticized for that. I thought, just because it's not liberal, because it's kind of stuck in the past. It's like, it's a Rambo film. It needs to be stuck in the past. And then I watched it and I was like, oh no, it's racist as fuck and it's totally shit. It was as disappointing to me as Die Hard 5 was. Like, that's how bad it is. Like, Die Hard 5 and Rambo 5 are 2 of the most upsetting films I've ever seen.
You know what? It seems to be the case lately, doesn't it? Whenever you're getting these films that we loved in the 80s and they're bringing a fucking 5th one out, it's the same with Dial of Destiny at the moment. Like, these 5th films are just, they're dire.
Dial of Destiny, though, doesn't belong in the same. I know we have different feelings about it. No, I'm not having that film anywhere near. Like, right, I get it. You don't like Dial of Destiny, and I was disappointed by it. But in terms of filmmaking, everything else, Dial of Destiny is over here. Die Hard 5 and Rambo 5 are upsettingly bad. They are upsettingly bad, as you found out during this podcast.
Yeah.
But so yeah, don't watch that one. But 1 to 4, good fun for sure. So yeah, let's move on. What the hell are we doing next week, dude?
Oh, it's next week's choice, is it?
Yeah, it's next week. We got to talk about eventually.
If I told you to picture Wesley Snipes with bleached blonde hair and dressed like Chucky.
Yeah, he really is dressed like Chucky. Shit, I never noticed that before.
Yeah,
he totally is.
Yeah.
Well, of course, talking about Demolition Man.
Yeah.
One of the most divisive movies amongst me and my friends. Not because we think it's bad, because we have different opinions on it. But yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ, that's a weird film because it was like early 90s. We talked about like moving away from the 80s. This is Stallone trying to make his way in early 90s cinema.
Well, not just early 90s, but set in like the future of like 2005 or whatever it's meant to be. So it's
when was it set? 2030 something maybe?
No, it was only 30 years. Was it? He's a 70-year-old, isn't he? So it's
or maybe it is. So
I think we've gone past what Demolition Time should be.
We might have. It could be like a Blade Runner situation. Like, well, Blade Runner's like 2019, wasn't it? So
2000. No. We're not there yet. We're only a couple of years off.
2032.
2032.
Oh, I fucking nailed it!
Spot on, dude.
Jeez, why is that stuck in my head? I haven't seen that film for years, but 2032 just stuck in my head.
Do you remember what they renamed Los Angeles to?
No, I cannot remember that.
The city of San Angeles.
Oh my God, that's rubbish. There's some weird shit in that film. And I know a lot of people love it. I've always had my issues with it. It's fun, but I always have my problems with it. But I've not seen that film for ages, so I'm totally looking forward to this one.
We're going to bring Dave back as well, because Dave's a big Demolition Man fan, I believe. So it'd be interesting to see his...
just before we go into it next week, are you a big Demolition Man fan?
Yeah, I like Demolition Man.
Yeah. But I know a lot of people love Demolition Man.
Okay.
And I'm always like, I'm like, put the brakes on a little bit. I was like, I'm not sure this film is as good as you fucking remember, dude.
I haven't seen it for a while, but I remember, like, I watched it a lot.
I remember this film being really fun, but a lot more flawed than a lot of people were willing to admit. That was my big thing.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting conversations, but I love the fact of everything you're going to take away from it, even next week, that Wesley Snipes is dressed as...
Chucky. Yeah. I never, like, with the dungarees and the orange top and everything. Yeah, he totally fucking is. But yeah, anyway, this has been Rambo 3. To join us next week for Demolition Man. And see, this is the weird thing. We never quite know how to end the episodes. Like, one of the things, after 100 plus episodes, we haven't figured this out. So I'm just going to say bye. Cheers, guys. Thanks for listening.
I was going to let you end it without interjecting anything. But the fact you just turned around and went, I don't know how to end this podcast. I thought, fuck it, I got to say something.
See, we're doing it again. We're just rambling our way to the finish line. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Actually, I do know how to end it. Please go and vote for us on the British Podcast Awards for... listeners' choice.
Yeah. We added links and stuff. So
yeah, we'll pop the links up onto social media. But yeah, if go ahead and vote for us as listeners' choice. I mean, we may get there, but I doubt it. But give us a vote.
Yeah. And if you don't like this podcast, vote for us anyway. Don't be a dick. Just vote for us. I mean, let's be honest. If you've made it this far, you can't. I assume you're not listening out of spite by this point. But who knows? God bless you if you've made it.
I'm going to listen to their full episode.
Yeah, no, I can imagine if you're a regular listener, I assume that by the time we get to recommendations, you just turn it off after that because you're like, listen, they don't have to finish this podcast. There's going to be like another 5 or 6 minutes of them just talking absolute bollocks, and then it's just going to end really awkwardly, as this one will. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing. Thanks for that, mate.
Cheers, Darry.
Yeah. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Hey, you go!